Message to temporary employee. On behalf of the entire organisation, we would like to thank you for filling in tonight. We do not doubt the offer arrived last minute, and we apologise for any inconvenience this may have caused you. Our usual night watchman had a family emergency, so you are doing us a huge service by being here tonight. On top of these expressions of gratitude, you'll also be compensated 5 times the average hourly rate. The temporary employment agency has been informed of these unique circumstances. Hopefully they briefed you on the agreement ahead of time. At first glance, your duty for the night may appear simple, but we strongly urge you to stay vigilant. For the duration of your shift, you will remain at your post in the reception area. Your job is to ensure no one enters after hours. The door you entered through is the only entrance into the compound. All employees are aware the night watchman is the only person permitted in the building past operating hours. You are unlikely to run into any trouble, but we operate under the belief it is better safe than sorry. Just remember to stay in the reception area during your shift. Thank you again for filling the position. We are confident in your success. P.S. The doors deeper into the facility are chained for your convenience. You are the only person in the facility, and the chain should not be unlocked for any reasons. No exceptions. I finished reading the letter for the second time and looked back at the key sitting on my desk. I hadn't noticed it when I first walked in because it was underneath the paper with my instructions. I hadn't tried to use it, but judging by the size, I was almost certain it fit the padlock, keeping the doors in the postscript of the letter chained. With the paper still in my hand, I made my way to the doors. The majority of the reception area resembled a doctor's office in both furnishing and sterility. There was even a stack of beat-up magazines on the coffee table in the middle of the sitting area. Saying the chained doors stood out in the room was an understatement. There were thick metal pocket doors that, even when pulled together, appeared to have a lot of unseen service area deep into the wall on either side. The tops and bottoms of each were reinforced to the point where I was pretty sure a truck would have a hard time getting through. The handles of each door bolted and welded tight to the surfaces. A hefty metal chain snaked through both of the handles and held together by a substantial padlock. Both doors were covered in stickers reading some variation of "Warning, door must remain closed at all times," more than a few written in different languages. For a short time, I stood in front of the massive doors before returning my attention to the key on the desk. I tried in vain to piece together why someone would say there was no exceptions to keeping a door closed but leave the key so easily accessible, especially someone who didn't even require a proper background check before being hired for a single night. I threw my hands up, waving the white instruction paper as a sign of unconditional surrender. It wasn't like this job had been conventional from the start. Jobs I got from the temp company usually came with information about necessary skills or a description of duties ahead of time. This offer hadn't even listed the name of the company. I hadn't heard of Homodynamics before walking up to the strange hourglass logo on the front door. Before reading the instructions, the only thing I knew about the gig was it was a night shift, the address, and the obscene amount of money they were paying. Unfortunately, the last piece of information was enough to ignore the red flags. I was falling behind on more than a few bills. Making 5 days worth of money in a single night would let me pull my head above water for the first time in a long time. Retreating back to the desk, I placed the key on top of the instructions, folded the paper, and slid it to the far side of the desk. There was a younger version of myself who wouldn't have hesitated to unlock the industrial doors and explore the secretive company's compound. But the decisions that version of me made was why I was in my 30s working temp jobs to attempt to make ends meet. So I was happy to sit behind someone else's desk and be grateful I had been able to pay off my data plan last month. For the first few hours, keeping myself occupied was really the only difficult part of the job. Around 3 in the morning, I had gotten bored of social media and my battery was starting to die. I had just started flipping through an ancient highlights magazine and wondering why any kid would be hanging out in this waiting area, when I heard something. At least, I thought I heard something. A faint slam that could have been something falling off a shelf or a door closing somewhere on the other side of the chain doors. I looked up from a spot the differences photo comparison I was embarrassingly struggling to find the final difference in and looked towards the door, straining my ears to see if there was any follow-up to confirm I had heard something in the first place. A little while passed in complete silence. I closed the Wrinkle Kids magazine and made my way back to the coffee table in the waiting area. I was in front of the chain metal doors when there was another bang, either louder or closer than the last one, and unmistakably the sound of a door slamming. I stopped mid-stride and turned my head towards the chain doors, the hairs on my arm and neck at attention and my mouth suddenly dry. In my mind, I reread the part of the instructions telling me I was the only person in the facility and there was only one way into the building. Another extended period of total silence, but I wasn't able to shrug this one off. I could feel my heart beating in my chest, but I was feeling bold. I came to the decision that if I could get closer to the door, I might be able to hear better. If I didn't hear anything else, I could chalk it up to a door or two being blown closed by a breeze. I made my way towards the chain doors, being sure to walk as quietly as possible, deep down hoping if someone was in the building, they hadn't realized I was here too. Standing below the doors, they looked more massive than my first impression. Again, standing quietly, trying to hear anything on the other side of the door. I closed my eyes in some attempt to focus more on my hearing. There wasn't another slamming door, but a few times I thought I heard something. A repetitive, soft tapping just at the edge of my range of hearing. But it was possible my mind was playing tricks on me. I understood what needed to be done. With my eyes still closed, I carefully put my ear against the cold metal door. I kept my breathing shallow and steady to not pollute my ears with any extra noise, and I listened. I didn't hear anything right away, but as my ears adjusted, I could tell there was definitely something making noise beyond the doors. A chill washed down my back, and I realized it was closer to me than the slammed doors had been. The taps were constant in their production, but not in location. Moving back and forth around the building, sometimes getting closer and other times farther away. Footsteps. I stifled a gasp when I came to the realization. I was certain they were footsteps, but there was something off about them. There were too many at any given time to be a single person, but they moved too uniform from place to place to be a group of people. A cold sweat came over me when I started wondering what a combination of that information could mean. I knew I needed to get away from the door and let someone know, but my instructions hadn't left any contact information. Pushing gently away from the door, I wondered if there was maybe a phone number in the desk's drawers. I was only halfway through the thought when a metallic clatter directly behind me shattered the silence. I opened my eyes and looked down at its origin. A children's activity book I'd completely forgotten about was tangled in the chains, causing them to make contact with the metal door. I clenched my teeth and hoped it hadn't been noticed. For a short silence, I was hopeful. But that hope quickly evaporated as I heard the footsteps. Far away at first, but getting closer fast. The continuous thud of far too many feet closing in directly on my location. Without breaking my eyeline on the door, I backed away from the approaching clatter, dropping the magazine that sold me out in the process. My back pressed against the exit when the thing first made contact with the chain door. Sudden, heavy pounding erupted from the other side. A moment ago, the door seemed impenetrable, but now I watched as it shuddered with each hit. Turning to the exit, I placed my hand on the knob, but it wouldn't turn in my hand. I looked down for some sort of latching mechanism, but there wasn't even a keyhole. The realization I had been locked in from the other side hit me in waves. With the slamming getting only more intense behind me, I desperately pushed on the door with my full body weight. For a few moments, I was lost completely in my goal of escape. I was flooded with so much fear, I hadn't even registered the assault on the chain door had halted. I was still trying to force the exit open when I heard the voice. "Excuse me, is someone out there who can help me?" The voice spoke in a calm, disjointed manner. It sounded like it was coming at me from all directions. I abruptly stopped pounding on the exit and felt my shoulders relax. Without really thinking of why, I turned back towards the warning-covered metal doors and stood silently. I was unable to answer the voice's questions. "Thank goodness you are there, friend. It is embarrassing to admit, but I fell asleep at my desk and they have mistakenly locked me in here." I took a step towards a large doorway, still unable to speak to the voice, but for some reason, that inability didn't seem very important. "I'm going to guess you aren't the usual guy. I apologize if I gave you a scare, friend. Would you mind doing me a huge favor and grab the key off the desk beside you?" I continued to slowly move towards the chain doorway, but I veered a little to my right towards the reception desk when he said this, my hand hovering over the folded paper where I had left the key. What a wild situation, right, friend? Usually, I just wait for the workday to start, but my phone is dead. I bet the wife and kids are worried sick about me. Just go ahead and grab that key. My attention still on the door, I grabbed the paper and dumped the key into my hand. "Friend, you're a lifesaver. You'll need to stick around after your shift. The guys aren't going to believe me when I tell them. Just put the key in the lock and let me out." Moving briskly now, I clutched the key in my hand, tight enough to draw blood. My other hand reached out for the lock before even getting to the doorway. I have no doubt I would have opened the door if I hadn't stumbled on the highlights magazine on the floor where I dropped it. The unexpected movement breaking me out of whatever hold the voice had on me. I winced as a sudden explosion of pain entered my head. "Friend, come on now. I just need you to put the key in the lock and let me out. Don't make me wait here all night. I'm starting to get hungry." The voice sounded less casual and now held an undertone that was delicately less human than before. Still, I could feel it washing over me again and felt the need to unlock the door. So, I did the only thing I could. I lightly slid the key between the crack where the pocket doors emerged from the wall. It was easily big enough for the thin key to slide through, but far too small for my hand to get it back. An immediate cacophony of pounds met the other side of the door when the key left my hand, the large metal slab shuddering against the attack. I retreated once again to the exit on the other side of the room, but I didn't try to get through this time. It was clear my only chance of safety was the chain doors. For hours, the thing beyond the chain doors alternated between besieging the door with its might and silences while it recovered its strength. Each renewed assault seemed like it would be the last, but the metal doors shook against its attacks, but they never gave out. After a particularly long silence, I assumed the thing was preparing for a final charge. Instead, the exit door I was pushed tightly against gave way, and I fell backwards into the early morning light. I blinked in surprise, looking up at a confused man wearing a lab coat. I recognized the familiar hourglass logo embroidered over the name tag that read Dr. Brown. "Jesus, are you still—" Dr. Brown started to say, but caught himself before he finished. "I mean, you must be the temporary night watchman. Nice to meet you." Maybe I should have pressed him for answers, or even gotten up and punched him. But in that moment, I just continued to lay on the ground in disbelief. "Well, looks like great work tonight," Dr. Brown said insincerely, while craning his neck to look in the reception area. Looks like the door is still locked. Do you mind heading back in for a coffee or tea? I was on my feet before he finished the sentence and sped out of the parking lot as fast as possible. My last memory of the building was Dr. Brown in my rearview mirror while on the phone. From his body language, he didn't seem happy. And it didn't look like he had any interest in going inside. The hot air blew up north from the Gulf, and the cold wind swept in south from Canada. And when the two fronts collided over the plains, their battle spilled over into a monstrous, rolling storm cloud not a few miles north of my lot in the woods. For the better part of an hour, as things were unfolded, the buzz of the weather alert was all I could hear on the TV and on the radio. They're saying this one could be a big one, folks. Stay indoors and be prepared to run to the cellar if this supercell does indeed produce a funnel cloud. We'll keep you updated as more information becomes available. And, all at once, I could see the black underside of the beast as it moved, and then the trees started to list and sway, and then the wind rolled up through the grass until it blew dust onto my trousers and into my hair. I whistled. "Come on, Shiloh," I said. "Inside, boy, let's go." Just as the dog made it inside, it began to rain. Nothing but a drizzle at first, but then a pounding, howling downpour that fell in sheets and torrents. It turned the dirt into mud and then poured from the gutters, and it swept up against the windows like ocean surf. And Shiloh, never one for thunderstorms if he could help it, lay down on the rug and covered his snout with his paw and began to whine. "Hang in there, boy, it'll be over soon." I sat down on the recliner and turned on the TV and pet him absent-mindedly with my free hand. "Well, do you think it'll produce a twister?" "It's hard to say right now, Debbie. The conditions, we think, are there, especially here near Fairfield and over here in the Manchester area. You can see on the radar how that's playing out, so that's certainly a cause for concern that we're keeping a close watch on. We're actually getting word now that there is indeed a tornado watch in Fort Hutchins and in Charles County, and of course you can get a more comprehensive list of affected areas in our website and at the bottom of the screen. To anyone in the path of this storm, especially in those areas, it is imperative that you are either prepared to move to a storm shelter on short notice or find a low place to hide, without windows if at all possible. Place mattresses up against any exposed windows if you can, and do not attempt to drive away from the storm until the watch is expired." I looked out the window. It was hard to see much of anything through the wind and the rain, but it was dark out there for sure. "Stay put, Shiloh. I'm going to take a quick peek out the door." I cracked it open just a bit, and the sound of the storm exploded into the house. I could barely hear the dog bark over the sound of the wind and rain and the claps of thunder. A spear of lightning shot through the sky. "It's a big one, boy," I shouted. "Might have to rev up that generator in a bit." I eased the door open a bit more and leaned out. Within seconds, I was nearly as soaked as the porch, and then I had to squint and shield my eyes and wipe my hair from my forehead when the rain plastered it there. In the distance, through the trees, I could still see the sunset, but the red and orange and yellow there hit a hard, fast wall of blackened storm clouds a few miles off, and that cloud only got darker and more violent the closer to the house it got. The grass in my fields became flattened with wind too, and the trees were heaving sideways and billowing their tops to the windfall as the storm threw its back to their beating. I looked up. The clouds were moving fast above the house. They swirled and bulged as they chased their tails, and wisps of them scouted the ground and dipped deep and low. I felt Shiloh brush up against my leg. "Back inside, boy." I gently nudged him with the heel of my boot. "Things are getting worse out here." I shut the door. Shiloh went back to his spot on the rug and resumed his whining. I knelt down and scratched behind his ear. It helped a bit. "Almost over, boy. Storms this bad can't last too long." But the storm didn't let up. It carried on through the afternoon and into the evening, and only strengthened as it did. I kept the TV on as I made a casserole. And luckily, the worst of the storm is holding to the northwest of Kensaw, which, of course, is minimizing the damage there. That's right, Deb, but the roads there are just clogged to death and back with people getting out of the storm's way, and that kind of congestion could prove to be more dangerous if things do indeed decide to move in that direction. Well, we certainly hope everyone there gets to safety before that happens. Shiloh had his nose pressed up against the window. He was almost perfectly still. His tail was tucked, his paws were set wide, and he had one of his ears standing on end. Anything interesting out there, boy? The storm had reached a hurricane level of fury. The rain was flying in sideways now, and bursts of lightning illuminated downed trees at the edge of the yard. The rest of them continued to bend their spines. Crazy the power's still on, ain't it? I scratched the back of his head. He continued ignoring me, but when I got up to check on dinner, he barked. Shush, hey, no need for that, Shiloh, come on now. He barked again. Shiloh. He barked a third and a fourth. Then his ears flattened up against his head and he backed up a little from the window and growled under his breath. You see something, boy? He barked again. I went back over to the window, but all I could see and hear was darkness and wind. Come on, no more barking inside, boy. So, where's this all coming from, Kevin? It's been churning non-stop for 12 hours now. Emergency crews can't get out there to do their jobs properly. It's definitely lasting longer than anyone predicted, I'll give you that. But it's not unheard of for particularly powerful front collisions to result in longer lasting supercell systems like this. We'll just have to see how it plays out. And has the centre of the storm moved at all? Bizarrely, it hasn't, Deb, and that's the strangest thing. It's remained relatively stationary outside Kensaw and Bellsouth, and it's actually gaining strength in certain areas too, if you can believe it. And of course, we're now getting some reports of widespread power outages and property damage in the Riverside area. Here's a video of the 7-Eleven at the intersection of Turner and Route 40 that was turned in to us by an anonymous source. You can clearly see some severe structural damage to those gas pumps and a lot of debris floating around the parking lot. It's not the best angle, but if you look right here, you can see part of the gas station roof is kind of hanging off there. You see that? Unfortunately, we have yet to hear of any injuries or fatalities, but there's only so much a lot of the older buildings out there can take. Unfortunately, that's right, Deb. A lot of the houses in Riverside and Kennesaw were built decades ago, and in some of the lower-end neighborhoods out there, the architecture is particularly vulnerable to high-speed, prolonged winds like what we're seeing here tonight. Any advice for people who might be trapped in those areas for the duration? Well, you covered the bases pretty well earlier, I think, but it's worth repeating. Board up your windows or put up mattresses in case the glass shatters, and at all times, have a place to run to if things get particularly bad. Make sure it has no windows, make sure it's low to the ground. Bathrooms and basements are good choices to run to in a pinch, and, as a last resort, find a ditch or some low ground to lie down in. Do not, under any circumstances, attempt to take shelter in a highway over... Kaboom! I nearly fell out of my chair. Shiloh yelped and leapt back into his defensive stance by the window, ears flattened to his head, hair up an end, teeth bared to the gums. He barked again and then growled. Loudest clap of thunder I ever heard. What about you, boy? I scratched him behind the ears, but he was focused on something else. I followed his gaze to the top of the trees, and, just as I did, there was a spectacular flash of red lightning that spilled its glow across the forest. Shiloh let out a squeal of confusion. My mouth hung open a bit. The hell? The lightning flashed again. A deep, almost purplish red, thrown out by gigantic spears of electric power that shot to and fro. And through a small gap in the mist, I saw nearly to the top of the big storm when it did. It was a colossal monstrosity, a billowing, rolling titan obscured by the darkness of its own underside and lit from within by sparks and snaps of lightning. It must have stretched for miles in every direction, and God only knew how high up to the atmosphere it went. I ain't never seen anything like that in my life. I rubbed Shiloh's back, starting to think this isn't any normal storm, old buddy. Those flashes of red lightning kept up throughout the night, and every once in a while they'd be joined by lancing snaps of blue and purple. It was a spectacular and breathtaking display, wondrous and otherworldly to behold, and the single most terrifying experience of my life. And throughout it all, the rain kept falling in sheets, and the wind held at steady, low hurricane speeds for hours on end. The front yard was littered with debris and branches and hailstones the size of fists. The power flickered in and out too. I had the TV on while Shiloh and I watched the storm from the window, and I glanced back from time to time. The picture flickered and static filled up the screen in between the shots of the news desk. Reports of red lightning are confounding over in review where... Deb, this is unlike I've ever seen. This is not an ordinary storm. The clouds above... Lumnibus. Culmino. Hypercell? His new classification? Well, it's... Yes. And who... The feed turned to static, and then, with an audible snap, the power went out for a final time, and we were left alone in the dark. I whistled. Just us in here now, boy. I hugged him tight. Glad you're here with me, buddy. That's got to count for something. And we turned back to the window to watch the storm. Shiloh plodded up and started licking my face. I woke up on the living room floor. Hey there, boy. I scratched behind his ears. Then I looked outside. The storm hadn't even begun to slow down. I stared at it for a while. Can't believe it's lasting this long. It truly was incredible. The rain had abated a bit, I could see. Not a lot, but a bit. But the wind still howled, and the sky remained nearly pitch black dark. Not a drop or note of sunlight made it through the clouds, but bursts of lightning lit up the yard. It looked like a psalm. Trees were leafless and downed, branches carpeted the grass, and I could even see split roof shingles lying soaked in puddles at the foot of the yard. Hey boy, I said, I'm going to run outside and see if I can turn on that generator. You stay put, okay? He wagged his tail, but when he saw I was moving for the door, he stood up and barked. I'll be back in a minute, okay? I threw on my coat. Generator's just outside. Calm down. He barked again and again, but I just rolled my eyes and stepped outside. As expected, it took less than a second to get completely and utterly soaked in the downpour. I could feel the moisture through the coat. It soaked straight into my t-shirt, and even my boots struggled to keep my feet dry. But I slogged through the mess and the mud and the debris all the same and slowly advanced up to the generator. I threw back the tarp and... clack! I turned around. Shiloh had thrown himself up against the inside of the window and had descended into madness. He was barking and snapping and clawing and chewing at the glass and desperately trying to grab my attention. I'd never seen him in such a fit. Then I heard something in the distance that constituted the single loudest and most bizarre sound I'd ever heard. It wasn't thunder. It wasn't an explosion. It sounded like a ship docking at the harbour, a deafening sonic blast that lasted for several seconds and carried hard and steady over the thunder. I turned around. I couldn't see much, but I saw enough. There was something in the cloud, a formless mass moving east and still hidden well behind the mist. Then I heard the sound again. Boom! And then a flash of red lightning lit up what I could now confirm was a still clouded over form of something moving there. Something alive that was titanic and otherworldly to a degree I couldn't begin to comprehend. I forgot all about the generator. I dropped the cord. I forgot all about Shiloh too, who was still barking himself into a fit inside the house. And for the briefest moments, I even forgot about the storm. I was simply standing there in unspeakable, existential awe. Not a normal storm indeed. Not by a long shot. I stood and watched the beast, whatever it was, move slowly but with grace behind the storm. Then I heard a low, rumbling thud that may have been a footstep. The ground shook when it hit, and then the giant shadow of the figure faded into the upper clouds, and the storm resumed as before with a spectacular clap of thunder that shocked me back to reality. I looked at Shiloh. He was now looking at me through the glass as if to say, "What the hell are we doing here?" "Alright, boy," I nodded. "Let's get the hell out of here." The storm was so violent when I opened the garage door that it looked like we were staring out into a blizzard. All the wind-whipped rain was flying in just about every direction, not just down, and there were rocks of hail and leaves and sometimes whole branches in the mix as well. I climbed in the truck and started it up. "Alright, boy, you ready?" He didn't whine or bark or make any sound or movement whatsoever. "My thoughts exactly, bud." I eased my foot onto the gas and off we went, with the high beams on and the windshield wipers on full blast. The driveway had become covered in debris, so the truck bounced and jostled as we made our way towards the wooded path that led out onto the main road. God, let the road be clear. I knew the odds were against us, but I just kept moving. 5, 10, 15 miles per hour, through the surf and the storm and hail. The trees offered some manner of shelter, at least, and spectacularly, the road was clear enough to drive through. None of the felled trunks had barricaded the path forward. I hit the gas harder, and we fell into gear and shook and rolled all the way down to the Hill Farms Boulevard. "Can't believe we got this far, huh, boy?" Shiloh was whimpering in the seat next to me. "Hang in there, we'll be out of this mess before you know it." I said the words, but I'm not sure if I believed them. We drove north for hours. Occasionally, we'll see a tree in the road, or a pile of debris, or an abandoned car with its blinkers still flashing through the fog, and we'd navigate accordingly. But by and large, the roads were clear, and I wanted to exploit that fact to its end before the whole damn town and all of nature's wrath came on top of us all at once. I tried the radio on multiple occasions too, but there was nothing to be heard there but static. I gave up after the third attempt. A burst of red lightning streaked across the whole sky at once. Shiloh didn't respond, but when the thunderclap hit, he jumped almost entirely off the seat. Kaboom! Things seemed to be getting worse. So intense was the downpour, in fact, that I was getting dripped on, despite having the car sealed up tight. To boot, there was the almost complete lack of visibility. I could see maybe 50 yards ahead when the rain broke up, but not an inch more. At its worst, I could see nothing but mist and cloud. I'd reduced my cruising speed to 10 miles per hour to accommodate this. The gas tank sat at the halfway mark. It carried on this way for over an hour before Shiloh sat up straight and started whimpering and pouring at the window. I looked out the glass on my side. We were downtown, I saw. It's a small, isolated place, so downtown is about 3 intersections wide in any direction, but in the shroud of fog and rain, it looked expansive and mysterious. Light poles, sands of light of course, loomed out of the clouds and hung gloomily over the road. I could see storefronts too. Windows and doors were boarded up on most, but in a few, Carl's Pharmacy and the Subway among them, the doors were thrown in and the interiors gutted. Debris and rubble littered the sidewalk in the street, and as had been the case in my yard, the road became rough and uneven as a result. "Looks like hell out here, doesn't it, boy?" Shiloh kept pouring at the glass, but then he stopped all of a sudden, and he perked up his ear. I listened too. What the hell? For the first time in 26.5 hours, we began to hear silence. The rain fell from a downpour to a steady rhythm, then to a drizzle, then to a pitter-patter, and then to nothing at all. The wind died out too. Even the clouds began to part and spread and thin out and dissipate, and before long, the road ahead became clear enough to see without straining and guesswork. I laughed aloud and aggressively rubbed the back of Shiloh's head between the ears. "Damn, boy, we made it. Safe Boom! I almost drove us off the road. That horn blast sound had exploded through the fog and vibrated the windows and made my eardrums sting. It was orders of magnitude louder than it was when I'd first heard it. Boom! I slammed on the brakes and covered my ears with both hands. Shiloh went mad. "Come on, calm down, boy." I could hardly hear my own voice. "You ain't helping anything by..." Boom! I felt that more than I heard it, and I heard it just fine. I looked over to the left. Boom! The whole car shook and rattled and trembled, and all the rocks outside jumped up at the impact. Boom! And there it was, a leg. A leg that more closely resembled a California redwood in complexion and size, although it dwarfed even that. Boom! The beast was walking across the road and making a spectacle of it. I could only see the mammoth lower half of its legs as it moved. The rest was still shrouded by mist and fog and cloud, but even that was an awesome and terrible sight to behold. Boom! It took a full minute for the Titan to cross the road and carry on its way to the east. I eased my foot off the brake and we began to roll forward again. My heart pounded the entire time. Boom! The horn blast sound drifted away on the wind, and soon the centre of town was behind us and fading deep away into the mist in the rear-view mirror. The road remained rough for another mile or so, but the storm continued to clear up and visibility improved at a steady rate until the fog had cleared. Hang in there, Shiloh. The poor dog was so exhausted he almost lacked the energy to care. We're almost out of here, boy. We're almost free. But then, the last of the clouds parted ways, and we saw it. A scene of awesome and spectacular devastation. The whole of Foster County had nearly ceased to exist. In its place now sat a desolate, grey pit of impossible scope, miles across miles deep, stretching down into the earth like an excavation site or an industrial mine dug up to unearth something of utterly mammoth size. There were no living trees or grass or running water or any signs of wildlife here. Just endless grey rock and stone, spiralling down deep and then back up and then stretching off into the distance until it ran up against another wall of fog and cloud storms 10 or 12 miles down. God almighty, I said, and leaned down to view the scene from the side of the glass as we rolled by. Doing so brought the sky into view. Will you look at that? Above the pit, spilling its light out over the landscape below it, sat the swirling red centre of the storm. The relative calmness of the air beneath it hinted its purpose was not particularly unlike a hurricane's eye, and yet it was so thoroughly covered up with clouds it blotted out the sky entirely. Red lightning cracked and snapped all around it, and at the centre sat a swirling, blood-red vortex from which everything appeared to emanate and spread. Beneath it and from it were multitudes of titans too, flying up out of the pit and into that vortex and vanishing forever. Shiloh whimpered and whined. I don't know, boy. Maybe they've been down there all along. Maybe that thing there's their way back home. The scene was finally obscured again by wisps of light fog, and before we knew it, we were back again in the thick of the storm. The portal's presence had kicked up, our atmosphere's white blood cell reacting to something alien in its midst. We drove again for hours, through wind and hail and sheets of rain, and past other titans moving home. Boom! But we made it through in good order. The storm finally stopped somewhere north of Tawny River and the town there of the same name, where we had filled up our tank and got a room for the night. The storm raged for 3 more days there, non-stop and at full fury. And then, in the blink of an eye, it was over. Clear skies and ruined earth. Maintenance and emergency crews finally swept in and did what they could to assist survivors, and after a few weeks, Shiloh and I returned home to rebuild. Oddly enough, I never did hear a thing about those titans. Odd as it may sound, I believe Shiloh and I might have been the only ones left by the time they emerged. I'm sure others heard them, but we may well have been the only ones to actually see them. And that leaves us burdened with a terrible and wonderful truth, that even on this planet, we are far from alone. I'm still not completely sure what happened last night. I just can't seem to wrap my head around what I saw, or why, or even how. Maybe writing down everything that happened will give me some kind of peace. Maybe. Let me just begin. I'd been on the road for over 5 hours before I finally decided to pull over and take a wee. I was making good time, but I couldn't wait any longer. My bladder was full of Monster, along with other assorted caffeinated beverages, and it was screaming at me to release the pressure. At that point in my travels, I was in between major highways, and I wasn't even sure I would come across another gas station, or bathroom of any kind for that matter. No big deal, I figured. Urinating at the side of the road would work. Nature would have to be my bathroom. Luckily, it was the middle of the night and traffic had been non-existent for some time. I would have hated for a cop to come by and catch me dangling in the wind. I quickly swung my car into the first dirt pull-off I came across and slammed it into park. I left the motor running as I opened the door and jumped from the vehicle. There wasn't much light in the middle of nowhere, and I would need my car's headlights to help me see. Ain't nothing more dangerous than peeing in the dark. You never know what you might hit when you can't see. You might even hit yourself by accident, and I wasn't trying to smell like pee for the rest of the day. I guess I could have changed into one of my other pairs of jeans I had stuffed into the back of my car if need be, but why take unnecessary risks? A blast of icy air struck me as I got out of the car and immediately made my bladder scream even louder. No, it hadn't been screaming at that point, more like howling, like a cold dog howling at the moon. Jogging to the other side of my car, I swiftly unzipped my jeans and ignored the full body shiver that hit me when I exposed myself to the cold night. The mixture of warm urine and cold air caused me to feel contradicting sensations in my nether regions. I closed my eyes and let out a loud sigh of relief as my bladder began to empty. Once I was finished and tucked away, I didn't at once rush back to the warmth of my car. The chill wasn't bothering me as much, and I decided to take a moment to enjoy the peaceful quiet of the night. I peered down from the top of the steep embankment and out over a dark valley. Filling the valley was a thick forest that appeared to stretch on for a few miles. From where I stood, I couldn't see any lights, not from houses or businesses or other possible forms of civilization. I was in no man's land, or at least I would have been, until I eventually met up with State Route 33, a 4-lane highway that would take me the rest of the way. There also didn't seem to be a lot of movement or normal sounds coming from the trees either, except for a low serenade from a far-off owl. Maybe, since an inch or two of snow covered everything, the forest animals had decided to chill out for the night. All except for that single owl who just kept on singing on and on. It had been snowing most of the day and into the night, until finally stopping about half an hour before. Thankfully, it had been the light, fluffy stuff that doesn't stick real well to the roads. If it would have been that heavy, slushy crap, then it would have slowed me down and ticked me off. I always hated snow, but for some reason, I have always lived in places that got a crap ton of it every winter. With everything around me being still and tranquil, It helped to temporarily calm my constantly racing mind, which had been a welcome change. I had done nothing but hurry for the prior few days, and it was nice to just stop for a minute to breathe. My marriage had fallen apart, to put it lightly. To put it honestly, my marriage exploded like the damn time bomb it had always been. 4 years of building pressure, like peeing the bladder, until it finally went boom. I let her have whatever she wanted because I just didn't care. There hadn't been much to fight over anyway. We didn't own a house or have kids, thank God. We had a tiny, ugly dog, but that had always been her baby, not mine. I hated that dog. In the end, I managed to walk away from the devastation with what I could fit in my car. And having your entire life fit into a blue Chevy Impala really puts things into perspective, let me tell you. When I had been 18, like most naive assholes, I couldn't have run away from home fast enough. I had dreams to chase, mistakes to make, and a crazy girl to marry. But when the dust settled on my marriage, that was where I was headed back to. Home. My real home. And I couldn't get back to my parents and the town I grew up in fast enough. As I continued to peer into the distance, I could see the black outline of the Appalachian Mountains standing tall on the horizon, barely visible against the night sky. Black on black as a way of blending together. With the mountains in my sight, I knew that my destination was only a few more hours away. A pair of headlights suddenly pulled me from my thoughts. 2 bright orbs coming down the stretch of road I was standing beside. They were headed in the direction I'd been coming from. Damn, the vehicle's high beams momentarily blinded me, but I threw both my hands up real quick. I was able to partially block out the bright light until it shifted away from my eyes, and I could see again. When the headlights from my own car fell across this new arrival, I could tell that it was a car smaller than my Chevy. A compact, possibly foreign, dark blue. My Impala's headlights also fell on something else. A massive patch of ice on the road. The spot of ice was several yards long and wide enough to take up an entire lane of road, while still having enough width to spill over the other lane as well. Normally, black ice didn't scare me. It wasn't the evil villain some people made it out to be. Yet, by how clearly the surface reflected the moon, which had finally found a space between clouds from which to peek out, I could tell that the ice was thick and solid. There was nothing I could have done but hope that the approaching compact car had good tyres and a calm driver. Maybe the driver would notice the ice and take the other lane to avoid it. That's what I would have done. There hadn't been any oncoming traffic, making that the smart choice. But the driver never saw the black ice. Instead, the compact car took it dead center. From start to finish, everything that happened next only took a few seconds. The compact car began to slide as soon as it hit the ice. Its back end started to spin out. Rather than make a slight adjustment in the steering, I helplessly watched the driver panic. As the driver slammed on the brakes and pulled hard on the wheel, squealing tires replaced the once tranquil silence. The little car spun, and spun fast. It spun out onto the other lane and cleared the ice. At that point, the driver should have hit the brakes, but the driver was still panicked. I could hear the car's engine rev as the driver stomped hard on the gas. The wheels chose then to gain traction, which sent the car barreling across the road and over the edge of the embankment. At the sight of the car spilling over the edge of the embankment, I instantly dashed towards the other side of the pull-off. Standing and looking down off the edge, I could see the glow of 2 headlights rushing down the steep drop. Somehow, the car managed to almost make it down the entire decline without hitting one of the trees growing from the side of the hill. I don't want to call it luck that the car didn't hit a tree earlier in the fall, because it might have been better off striking one of the trees growing closer to the top. By the time it hit one near to the ground, gravity had been pulling hard on that car. Not even the snow did much to slow it down once gravity had its hands on it. I can't exactly say how fast the car was going when it finally hit, but when it did hit that tree, the sound of the impact, The twisting of metal and the breaking of glass shattered both the night and my mind into a million fragments. I don't want to be a drama queen, but it all sank into me deeply, all the way to my core. Whenever I try to sleep at night, I can still hear the destruction of that car getting wrapped around that tree. My phone. That was my first clear thought. I needed to call for help. If the driver was still alive, I needed to get someone there to help them. If the driver wasn't, someone still needed to be there to deal with it. After realizing that I had left my cell in my Chevy, I turned to run back and get it. But something stopped me. From moving. A woman screaming. "Help me, please! Somebody please help me!" The screams are obviously coming from down the embankment from the wrecked car. I tried to find a strong voice and yell back. I couldn't get as loud as I wanted to, but I did my best anyway. "It's going to be okay. Just hang tight. I'm going to call for help." The woman's voice became shrill and terror-stricken. Oh my god, help me!" Before I realized what I was doing, I was making my way down the hill. The moon had retreated back behind the dense clouds, throwing a thick shadow over everything. As I rushed through the dense night, I aimed myself away from the lights of my Impala and towards the headlights of the wreckage. I clearly remember having images of burning cars and burning people flashing through my head. I didn't see any flames, but there might be smoke. It would have been difficult to see dark smoke when everything else that night was just as dark. I had to act. I had to do something. I had to be sure that woman wasn't going to burn to death while I sat on the phone with 911 waiting for help to eventually show up. If that happened, I would never have forgiven myself. The Nikes that I was wearing were a far cry from hiking boots. They were not meant for descending down a steep, slick hill. Several times, the snow tried to bring me down, take both my feet from under me, but each time, I somehow managed to grab onto a nearby trunk or brush and stay on my feet. I was moving as fast as I could, but I didn't know if it was fast enough to matter. The woman had grown silent after the last hysterical howl. I began to fear what I might find. Keeping the headlights in front of me, I was able to find the wreckage in the blackness of night, and it was as bad as I had thought. The entire front of the compact car had been caved in, crushed into the shape of a large, jagged horseshoe. There was a little bit of smoke rising from the car, but it wasn't black smoke from active burning. It was light and faint, probably the car's small engine being obliterated, and I didn't smell any flames either. Yet fire suddenly became the least of my concerns. The way the car had brutally imploded against that damn tree immediately painted a different picture in my mind. At least, my rushing thoughts were no longer of burning women, but images of death still filled my brain. The driver had been alive and screaming for me, but that didn't mean she was still breathing. Part of me didn't want to go around to the driver's side of the car, but I needed to be sure. "Ma'am?" I called out as I rushed to the back of the vehicle. No answer. "Are you okay, ma'am?" Silence. When I made it to the other side of the car, I saw that the driver's window had been shattered, completely destroyed. I briefly stopped. The inside of the car was dark and hard to see into, just like everything else that night. As I fought against my rapid breathing, I reluctantly leaned in closer so that I could get a better look through the non-existent window. Someone was sitting in the driver's seat. "Ma'am?" I said. "Are you okay, ma'am?" It was a petite young lady, light brown hair pulled in a tight ponytail, mid-20s perhaps. But the young lady never moved or replied. She couldn't. She just stared at me, her neck twisted in an awkward angle, wide-eyed, forever afraid of what was about to happen to her. She hadn't been wearing a seatbelt and the airbag malfunctioned. When her face hit the steering wheel, the force nearly spun her head clean around. Dead on impact. Before the accident, the young lady might have been kind of pretty, in a simple kind of way. I remember my heart sinking as a realization hit me. If she had been dead on impact, then who the hell had been screaming at me? A passenger? I looked around the inside of the car, or what was left of it, but I didn't see anyone else. The passenger side was empty and the door was still closed. The back seat was empty too. The hair on the back of my neck stood up when I heard the same woman's voice. "Help!" It came from behind me, from somewhere in the trees. "Somebody help me! Who are you? Get away from me! Don't touch me! Help!" I could feel the fear in her voice. I could feel it as if it were my own. "Get away from me!" Someone else had been in the car, had been my assumption. With the trees creating a million little echoes, it was hard to pinpoint from exactly which direction the voice was coming. When I thought that I knew the general area I needed to go toward, I took off running. For several more seconds, the woman continued to cry for help, but ultimately the words died and all that remained were frightened screams. I yelled back once. I wanted her to know that I was coming. "Don't be scared, I'm here." I used her voice to guide me because, other than that, I was running blind. But I found her somehow. She must have heard me, because when I got there, she at once turned her head my way. She was a petite young lady, somewhere in her mid-20s, light brown hair pulled in a tight ponytail, kind of pretty in a simple kind of way, her eyes wide with fear. I knew that face. I had seen it only minutes before. It was the driver. But how? Twins? No, I can't explain it. But I knew that I was looking into the face of the same dead young lady. She was on her butt in the snow with her back against a tree trunk. The way she was pressed up against the base of the tree, it was like she was fending off a wild animal. But I didn't see any wolves or bears or coyotes. As I looked down on her, the words rose into my throat before I realized I was speaking. "I'm here to help, don't be scared." But I felt the words to be hollow. There was no help for her, and she may have been scared, but so was I, and there was no changing it. "Who are they?" she asked me. "Why are they after me?" "Who is after you?" I replied. I searched the area again, but I couldn't see anyone else but the two of us. "I don't know what you mean." She then raised her arm and pointed to a spot a couple feet from where she sat. "Them, don't you see them?" At first, I didn't. I couldn't. But when I opened my mouth to assure her that no one was there, the moon peeked from the clouds again, casting beams of light down on us. The light revealed something that I had not noticed the second before. Two figures standing in the exact spot the young lady was pointing. They were human in form, short, closer to the height of a child than an adult, and they were pure black from head to toe. No faces or features of any kind. Just a darkness as deep as I imagine a black hole to be. A bottomless void. But they were also smooth looking, polished. I could only see them with help from the moon, because the moonlight reflected across the two figures in the same way it had the patch of black ice. There had been a stillness about them, or at least there was, until the moon showed them to me. When it was obvious that I could now see them too, the two figures rushed at the young lady. It was so easy for them to grab her, to snatch her by the legs. There was nothing the young lady or myself could do to stop it. I don't know why they waited that long to take her. Maybe they'd been playing with the young lady until I showed up. I'm not sure. I will never be sure. Once the two figures had a hold of her legs, they began to drag the young lady away. She screamed and desperately tried to grab a hold of the tree trunk, but there was no chance of her holding on. They drug her off through the snow and into the woods. I can still picture her face as they drug her away. The terror, the helplessness. It seared into my brain. She had looked to me for help, but I couldn't do anything. I had been useless, or could I have helped her somehow? Could I have kept those things from grabbing her? No, there was nothing I could have done. For a second, after the young lady was pulled off, I was frozen by my fear. I did my best to shake it off and chase after them, but they were already out of sight. Even though I'd watched the young lady get dragged off through the snow, there was no physical path of any kind for me to follow, no trail of disturbed snow. It was weird. So instead, I tried to follow the only thing that I had, the young lady's horrific screaming. But even that became further and further away, until finally fading away completely, swallowed by the night. I don't know why I started yelling. I didn't know what else to do. "Can you hear me? Keep screaming so I can find you." I'm not sure how long I stood there, cold and shaking, but I continued to listen for her, for any signs of her, but there was nothing. I don't know where the two figures took the young lady, but they were long gone. At some point, I was able to gather my thoughts and navigate my way back to the wreckage by following the glow of the headlights. From there, I made my way back to my own car, again by following the glow of headlights. Getting back up the embankment was much slower and way more difficult than going down it, but I managed. I found my cell in the Chevy, where I knew it had been plugged in and charging. Before I dialed 911, I took a couple minutes to mentally rehearse what I was going to say. I couldn't completely lie, but I wasn't going to tell them everything. I would have sounded crazy. When the emergency operator answered my call, I told him that a car had wrecked on black ice and hit a tree. I'd gone down the embankment to try to help. My tracks in the snow would have told them that, whether I wanted to or not. But when I got to the crash, the driver had already been dead, killed on impact. I went back to my car, got my cell phone and called them. End of story. At least as far as they know. Until now, I've never said a word about finding the young lady, about watching her get dragged off by those two strange figures. But I need to try to finally get the words down. I desperately need to purge it from my mind the best I can. I will never have all of the answers for what happened that night. At least, not until the day comes when the two shiny black figures come for me too. I'm not looking for an epiphany or a moment of clarity. For now, all I really want is some damn peace and to be able to sleep through the goddamn night. Sometimes places bring out the worst in people, my dad always used to say. Now that I'm older, I realised he had it backwards. Sometimes it's people that bring out the worst in places. The old Baker house was one such place. It was the spring of '69 when we moved there, and from the minute we passed through the gated entrance, I knew there was something I didn't like about the property. My brother, Stanley, just 8 at the time, put it best. "This place gives me the creeps," he said. And creepy it was. A great marble statue, perhaps a couple centuries old, watched us as we pulled up to the front of the manor. The sculpture was of a man, perhaps an old caretaker. Whoever it was, he was dressed in a dashing suit with a rakish hat rested on his head. He had the look of an old military colonel, and I realised that once upon a time, this mansion must have been a sight to behold. The hands of time had not been kind to this place though. Here and there, boards covered up the windows, evidently broken by vandals throughout the years. Vines twisted their way into every crevice and weaved over the surface like spiders' webs. Dank air, heavy and wet, covered everything, rotting away wood and peeling back the last remaining wisps of paint. Only a few stray beams of light could penetrate the army of oak trees which hung over every square inch of the sprawling grounds. "It needs some work," my father remarked, "but this is home now." To be sure, it was an unsettling place at times, but there couldn't be a more perfect place for my brother and I to explore. The grounds were enormous, with groves and ponds peppering the acres of land in a never-ending maze. The house itself had countless rooms to examine, and I wondered how on earth somebody could ever need so much living space. Still, it was good to have so many places to play, because my brother and I had a hard time making friends in school. It's always tough being the new kid, and I missed my friends back in Missouri. People in California had funny accents, I thought, and I didn't understand the other kids' sense of humor. A lot of them made fun of me. They said that the Baker house was haunted and that the ghosts inside were going to kill me. I didn't believe them, at least not at first, but I had to admit that some strange things started happening around the house. Nothing too crazy. It's not like a monster jumped out from under my bed and tried to eat me or anything. It was more subtle than that. Little things around the house would rearrange themselves in places they weren't supposed to be. Trinkets would disappear for a time, and then, days later, pop up without explanation. Back in Missouri, my mom would often bring us over to visit my grandmother, and while the kids would go out to play, my mom and grandmother would sit inside and chat over their cups of tea. They'd sit next to my grandmother's wooden coffee table so that they could keep an eye on us out the window, and then they'd talk about life and bring up old memories from the past. When my grandmother passed away, she left the coffee table to my mom, and it became my mom's most prized possession. The first thing she did when we moved into the Baker house was move the coffee table squarely into the center of the family room. "There," she said, "it's beginning to feel like a home already." A week later, I came downstairs to find my parents in a fuss. My mom looked upset, and my dad was trying to smooth things over. "Ryan," my mom said to me, "did you move the coffee table?" Sure enough, the coffee table, which had previously been situated in the center of the living room, was now crudely flipped upside down and shoved into the corner wall. "No," I told her, "I didn't do anything. I was playing upstairs with Stanley." It wasn't just the coffee table though. All the other furniture in the living room had been rearranged. We had situated the couch facing the windows so that we could look outside when we sat down. Somehow, it had been flipped around so that it was facing the wall. The television, where my brother would sit and watch the Flintstones on Saturday mornings, was unplugged and flipped on its side. My mom turned white as a sheet. "Go to your room," she said angrily, "and don't come out until you're ready to admit what you've done." I guess I'd been grounded. Other strange things started happening in the coming days, and my parents went from blaming me for being naughty to being worried that maybe something more insidious was at play. I could tell by the way they whispered to each other that they thought something was wrong, and when I tried to fall asleep at night, I could hear them arguing in the next room over. One night, after we had gone out grocery shopping, we came home to find that all the picture frames in the entire house were flipped upside down. Not just the ones hung on the walls either, but every single portrait in the entire house. The one of my grandfather, the picture of my dad from when he joined the Navy, my brother's school picture, all of them rearranged without reason. It was pretty unsettling, but hard to pinpoint exactly what the cause was. I could see that my mother was pretty stressed, but my father was just trying to calm everyone down. We had come too far to go back now. "Look," he said one day, "this is a big adjustment for us all, but this is going to be good for our family. We're going to have a better life out here. You'll see." As if to sweeten the deal a little more, one day he burst through the front door with a special surprise for my brother and I. It was a puppy, a little golden retriever, and who we named Max. He was a fluffy ball of joy, still fuzzy with his baby fur, and always on the lookout for an opportunity to play. For a while, my brother and I forgot all about the furniture and the house and the bullies at school. We just laughed and played and chased Max around the yard without a care in the world. Still, the happiness didn't last for long. After school one day, I came home to find my mum crying hysterically on the couch. "What's the matter, Mum?" I asked. She just pointed wordlessly at the kitchen, and I saw that all the cabinets had been torn open. Their contents, various pots and pans, wooden bowls and silverware, were strewn carelessly across the floor. It looked as if somebody had robbed the place. My mum, as she explained, had been cleaning the bathroom upstairs, when all of a sudden she heard a loud bang come from the kitchen. She assumed it was just a creak, like most old houses are known to make, and didn't think anything of it. When she heard it again, she rushed downstairs to see the mess in the kitchen. Dad came home early from work, and my mother explained the situation. Dad was certain that somebody had broken in, but my mother had other ideas. The house, she was now convinced, was haunted. Never the superstitious type, my father dismissed the idea and called the police to investigate. The officers surveyed the ground, looking for some kind of evidence of a break-in, but found nothing. It was unlikely that somebody had broken in, they said. Most likely, it was just a strong gust of wind that had blown everything off the shelves. Never mind the fact that the window had been closed. Later that night, I was asleep in my bed when I felt a tap on my shoulder. It was my brother. "Stan," I snapped up. "Go to bed. It's the middle of the night." "Ryan, I'm scared," he whimpered. "There's a ghost outside." Alarmed, I shot out of bed and ran up to the windowsill. It was dark, so it took a minute for my eyes to adjust. There wasn't much moonlight, but I could still make out some of the objects familiar to me in the backyard. There was the patio table with chairs and wispy flowers blowing in my mother's garden. "I don't see anything," I said. But I spoke too soon. Next to the shed, past a rusty old wheelbarrow, I could see that something was moving in the darkness. It was a woman, twirling around like a ballerina, her white dress, trimmed with lace, flickering back and forth as she glided across the lawn. I screamed and barreled into my parents' room. "Mom, Dad," I panicked, shaking them awake. "There's a ghost outside." My father opened his eyes, half confused, half horrified, and quickly grabbed his 12-gauge from the cabinet. I ran back from the windowsill and watched as my father sprinted outdoors, shotgun in hand, still wearing his striped blue pajamas. By now, though, the woman in white was already gone. "I think you've been reading too many of those scary stories," my father said with an exasperated sigh. "There's nobody out there. Go back to bed." I could tell that my mother was not so convinced. She shot my father a concerned look that seemed to say, "We'll talk about this in the morning." April turned into May, and then May turned into June, until finally the last day of school arrived. My brother and I always walked home from school together, and after the bell rang, I sprinted outside while thoughts of summer adventures filled my head. I normally met my brother next to a stop sign at the school entrance. Usually, Stan was there before me, since the elementary school was closer to the main road than the middle school. Today, though, I arrived before him. I waited anxiously as the other kids passed by. Minutes ticked on, and finally, I started to get annoyed. Where the heck is he? I thought. Finally, I realized that Stan wasn't coming and decided to leave without him. He must have gone home without me, I told myself. After all, he was probably excited for summer vacation and forgot that he was supposed to meet me. When I walked in the front door, though, my mother threw me a dirty look. "Why are you late?" she asked, looking me up and down. "And where is your brother?" I shrugged, telling her defensively, "I waited for him, but he never came. I thought he went home without me." My mother's face contorted into worry. "No, he isn't home. I thought he would be with you, like he always is," she said tersely. My mother went into a panic now, realizing that Stanley was late and nowhere to be found. I admit that even I was starting to feel nervous too. Mom wanted to call the police right away, certain that Stan had gotten lost or was hurt or even worse. My father, on the other hand, while definitely concerned, jumped to less deadly conclusions. "He's probably causing trouble with his friends," he soothed her. "When I was a boy his age, I was always looking for the next commotion to get into." Mom looked at him incredulously, so my father added, "But if he's not back in a couple hours, we'll call the cops." Just as my father was about to reach for the phone, I saw somebody walking up the driveway. It was dark by now, but I could tell by their short stature and lumpy knapsack that the person was none other than my kid brother. I couldn't tell if my mother was going to burst into tears of happiness or if she was going to lay into Stan and ground him for a month. It seemed that she couldn't decide either. "What were you thinking?" she asked, white as a sheet, followed with, "Thank God you're home. I was so worried." With that, she wrapped my brother in a tight embrace. After a period of time where I thought she might never let my brother go, Stan finally pushed himself away. "Sorry, Mom," Stanley said. "I was out playing with my new friend. We met on the way home from school." My mother seized Stanley by the shoulders. "Well, don't scare me like that," she said, but softened it with, "What's your friend's name?" "Charlie," my brother shrugged. And with that, my mother seemed ready to calm down. At long last, she was satisfied that Stanley was safe. I bet she never slept as well as she did that night. A day later, my brother and I were home alone, playing downstairs with our set of Tinker toys. All of a sudden, we heard a violent bang from upstairs. "What was that?" I asked my brother. Stan shrugged, afraid to say what we both knew. It was the woman in white, back again. I grabbed a poker from the fireplace and, brandishing the pole menacingly, crept upstairs to the hallway above. "Shh," I motioned to my brother, a few steps behind me, and quietly pushed open each of the doors on the second floor. I tapped each one open with my foot and then raised the poker in hand, ready to strike the ghostly woman that I was certain stood inside. One by one, each door opened, and each one turned out to be empty. Nobody was there, but Stan and I looked at each other seriously. We both knew what we heard. After we walked back downstairs, we realized that something was different. Our Tinker toys were still strewn across the floor, just as we had left them. But we realized that something was off. "Where's Max?" my brother asked. It was a good question. I looked around and realized that our little puppy was nowhere to be found. We searched downstairs, peering into the living room, the dining room, and the kitchen. He was gone, it seemed, left without a trace. My brother and I ran outside and called to him, thinking that he had seen a squirrel and somehow escaped outside. I even brought Max's favourite toy, the one shaped like a bone with a squeaker inside, but not even that would bring him back. Of course, my brother and I were both sobbing when my parents came home. My dad reassured us that Max would come back. He had just run away for a little while, he explained. We made some signs with a picture of Max and our phone number so that people could try bring him home to us if anybody found him. And Dad drove us around town, stapling them to all the utility poles. I didn't sleep well that night, and I tossed and turned for hours, trying to put my mind at rest. All I could think about was Max. Where was he? Was he okay? Was he scared? Did he miss us? Just as I was about to slip away into the darkness of sleep, I heard something that made me sit up straight. It was a creaking floorboard from the hallway. Quietly, I pulled the covers off and crept out of bed, slowly opening the door I peered out into the hallway. There was that creaking noise again, but this time I saw where it was coming from. There was the white woman standing in the hallway, head bent down with her hair flowing towards the floor. She was standing in front of my brother's bedroom door. One of her hands, pale and ghostly, stretched up lifelessly towards the wooden doorframe, her arm sleeve loosely slumped down to her elbow. With a curled finger, she took one of her long fingernails and gently scratched at the entrance. I couldn't help but gasp, and even though I tried to stifle the sound with my hand, the woman's head snapped up. She twisted her head to the side to face me, revealing wavy black hair with a pale complexion. Her dress was white like before, but this time I noticed a smattering of blood smeared across her stomach. The woman in white curled her mouth into a sadistic smile and put a finger to her lips. I started to cry now. The streams of tears rolled down my face. Something resembling a kind of sob came out of my mouth as hot panic bubbled up inside my chest. "Mom, Dad," I shouted, turning to my parents' room. Judging by the rustling of sheets and the stomp of feet hitting the floor, my parents are rushing out of bed. The faint click of my father's shotgun resonating behind the door. And sure enough, my father burst from inside the bedroom with a look of vengeance on his face. "What?" he asked. "What's going on?" "The ghost is back," I said, pointing back to my brother's room. But she was gone. My father frantically rushed past me and poked into my brother's room. After ascertaining that Stan was safe, he quickly moved through the rest of the rooms in the house. Wherever the ghost had come from, she was now gone. After surveying the grounds, Dad came back in, shaking his head. "There's nobody here," he said. I was not convinced though. I knew what I saw. For the longest time, I could tell my dad was skeptical about the ghosts that my brother and I had been seeing. I don't think he thought my brother and I were lying exactly, but he must have thought the stress from the move was taking its toll on us. My mother was still adamant that the house was haunted. "Maybe we should call a priest," she suggested. But my father would have none of that. "I don't want to get any of those religious quacks coming down here," he dismissed. The next day though, everything changed. We were sitting around the kitchen table eating breakfast, still groggy from the night before, when my father asked me to go outside and fetch the mail. I did as he asked and ran down to the mailbox to grab the newspaper. Something looked different about the mailbox compared to normal, but the morning sun was shining so brightly in my eyes that I couldn't see clearly. Something appeared to be hanging from the mailpost. As I moved closer, I realized with horror what it was and felt sick to my stomach. Hung from the mailbox by a strand of wire around his neck was the stiff body of a baby golden retriever. It was Max, I realized, and I could see several blooded openings in his hardened fur that looked like stab wounds. I threw up all over the driveway and ran up to the house, crying hysterically. "What's the matter?" my mother asked, dismayed. I couldn't even put into words what I wanted to say, and just pointed outside. My father, accustomed to a state of panic by now, put his coffee down and walked outside while my mom held me in her arms. When he came back inside, he was white as a sheet. I had never seen him so caught off guard before. He was always the type of person who knew exactly what to do, but now he was simply looking off into the distance, totally stunned by what he had seen. "What is it?" my mother asked with a worried look. My father bent down and whispered something in her ear that made my mother gasp. Her eyes widened with a panic. The police arrived later that morning, and I was relieved that they took Max away so I wouldn't have to see him again. I felt a little guilty thinking that way, because he was my dog and I loved him, but I just couldn't bear the sight of seeing his body. My parents flicked on the television set while they talked with the police. Being allowed to watch cartoons all morning should have made me giddy with joy, but I couldn't get over the feeling of sadness and panic. No matter what I did, I just could not get the images of Max's body hung off the mailbox out of my head. After the police left, Mum and Dad sat us down and explained we were going to be leaving for a while. "Pack your things," Dad said. "Bring all your clothes, some books, whatever you'll need. We won't be coming back for a while." By that night, we were gone. Days went by, followed by weeks, and I finally realized that we weren't ever going back to the old baker place again. We were gone for good. In the meantime, we settled into a hotel about an hour north of Los Angeles so that my father could still keep his job, and for a while, things seemed to return to normal. Still, the thought of the ghostly woman always haunted me. I wondered who she was, and whether she was the one who had killed my dog. One August morning, my father was reading the newspaper when he set his coffee down with a sharp thud. Clearly, whatever he was reading was of great interest. "What is it?" my mother asked. My father raised his eyebrow and handed the newspaper over. It read, "Ritualistic slayings, Sharon Tate, 4 others murdered." Apparently, a famous movie actress had been brutally murdered in her home not far from us. Certainly, it was scary, and the horrific nature of the crime unsettled me. But I didn't think much of it. Murders in the newspaper were the sort of thing that happened to other people. Things like that never happened to people like us. Or so I believed. Until I sat down in front of the television with my mom and dad one night. The evening news was on, and a group of mugshots were displayed across the screen. These people, the headlines explained, had been arrested in connection with the murder of Sharon Tate. "They're calling them the Manson family," my mother explained with disgust. I was surprised to see how many of the mugshots were of women. One of them, in particular, had a face that seemed familiar. Her name, the newscaster explained, was Susan Atkins. But I always knew her as the woman in white. I've had a lot of dead-end jobs before, but never one that required me to sign a non-disclosure agreement. "Before we order your background check, we need you to sign an NDA. Is that okay?" Clyde, the president of Kimball Private Municipal Services, said. "A what?" I'll admit, I didn't know what an NDA was at the time, but once Clyde explained what it was, I felt something I hadn't in years. I felt important. "Just so we're clear, if I sign this, I can't tell anyone what I do for my job?" I asked. "You can tell people you clean sewers for Kimball Private Municipal Services, but you can't divulge any sensitive details about our clients," he said. "Like what?" "We run into odd things in the sewers occasionally, and our clients generally don't want word getting out," he said. "Like dead bodies?" There was an awkward pause. "He's definitely talking about dead bodies. 'Cause I've seen like a million horror movies, and dead bodies do not bother me at all," I said, hoping to reassure him. "Tell you what, if you see something weird on the job and have a strong desire to tell someone outside of work about it, run it by me first." "Fair enough." Assuming the NDA is still in effect, which I'm pretty sure it's not, I've changed the names of all the people and places in this story. 4 days later, I was in a Kimball Private Municipal Services truck with Clyde and 2 other guys, heading to my first job. I sat in the back with a guy I'll call Beard A. Clyde and another guy I'll call Beard B were in the front. "Now, Scotty," Clyde said, half turning around from the driver's seat. "We have a unique job," he said. "Most of our clients, well, all of our clients, are small towns in central Montana," he continued. "They're too small to manage their own sewer system, or they don't have the manpower, so they outsource to us." "Too small to manage your own sewer? Why do you even exist as a town at that point?" I asked. Good question, Beardby said. Clyde continued. Well, pretty much all the residents in these towns are old people, retired folks living out their golden years without the hustle and bustle of big city life. It's got to be incredibly boring for them, I said. Beard A laughed. Let's just say they can be very creative in finding things to occupy their time, Beard B said. Like what? I said. The truck was silent for a moment. I assume I'm going to find out. Beard A turned to me and nodded, smiling. Our first job that day was a routine pump clean in Rowley. Beard A and I went down the manhole with our power washer and tools. The whole job took about half an hour, then we were on our way out. Beard A went up the ladder first. Just before I was about to go up, I noticed something bobbing in the water. You coming, Scotty? Beard A called down. I pulled the bobbing thing out of the water. It was a blood-stained shoe. I instantly felt sick. Someone died here, I said. If I hadn't been so hyped up about finding weird stuff in the sewers, I probably would have investigated further. But not then. Yeah, maybe, Beard A said. I hauled ass up the ladder and apparently looked very spooked, because Clyde and Beard B commented on it. Jesus, you see a ghost down there, Scotty? Beard B asked. No, I'm cool. Just, the smell of crap all over, I said awkwardly. Beard A laughed. You'll get used to it, Clyde said. I sure hope so. 20 minutes into the drive to our next job, I was feeling uneasy about whatever was to come. So, where are we going next? I asked in a shaky voice. That reminds me, Beard B said. You got the weed, Beard A? Sure do, he said, and pulled a silver cartridge from his bag. Is Clyde gonna do anything about this? Smoking weed on the job? Beard A took a long drag and exhaled slowly, extending the cartridge towards me. Oh, I'm good, I said. You don't smoke? He asked. Well, I do. I did, until I had to get clean for this job. And also, it's my first day of work. I want to stay sharp, I stammered. Beard B took the cartridge and did 3 quick puffs. Then, to my shock, Clyde, the company president and the operator of our vehicle, grabbed the cartridge from Beard B and took a couple deep drags. You sure, Scotty? He asked. Am I missing something? Also, no one ever answered my question. Where the hell are we going? To be honest, I was a little ticked off that everyone was so casual about smoking weed on the job. I was stoked that my team was cool with smoking, but part of me felt like I was being set up. Right, Clyde said. We're going to Arch Falls. Ever heard of it? The little lake town? Of course. But didn't that place burn down in the 70s? I said. Beard A snorted a laugh. It burned enough to shut the whole town down, Beard B said. But a lot of the structures are still intact. But I thought you couldn't even drive to it, it was so bad, I said. There's a little country road that goes through the backside. The 3 of them passed the cartridge around again. Wait, so you're telling me that Arch Falls is one of your clients? One of our clients, Scotty, Clyde reassured. We pulled onto a dirt road that led into a small canyon. T-minus 10 minutes, Beard A said, and laid his head back. Who exactly is paying you? Us. The town is abandoned, isn't it? I asked. Not exactly, Clyde said. There is a sunshine in my soul today. Beard A started singing with his eyes closed. He was smiling. More glorious and bright. Dude, Scotty, you need the weed, man, Beard B said in the front seat, high out of his mind. Oh, the sunshine, blessed sunshine, Beard A bellowed. Listen, Scotty, we had you sign those NDAs, right? Clyde said over the singing. Yeah, I said. What? Yes, I signed the NDA. Where the peaceful, happy moments roll. Beard B and Beard A sang together. Good, Clyde said. Okay, the people that occupy Arch Falls are religious. Like, weird religious. Beard A butted in. Like, Scotty, man, take the weirdest stuff you can think of and multiply by 100. That's how weird this religion... Dude, why are we calling it a religion? It's a straight up cult if I've ever seen one. We made it through the canyon. We followed a windy road that had mountains on one side and the Arch Falls Lake on the other. The imagery was striking, especially as the town came into focus. The buildings were half standing and charred, almost completely black. The roads were kind of powdered asphalt. The place was a sea of 50-year-old rotting rubble. When Jesus shows a smiling face, there's a sunshine in my soul, Beard B sang. We stopped in front of a church in the middle of Main Street. Its facade was badly scorched, a composite of the original red brick and sloppy patchwork. The big, ornate wooden door looked fresh, as if it had been replaced recently. There were fresh flowers out front. You can't prep me for what I'm about to see? I asked as we unloaded, still sick from the bloody shoe. Like I said before, you need the weed, Beard B said, handing me the cartridge. That's the only prep that'll work. I reluctantly took it, zipped to my suit, and took a deep drag. We opened the manhole on the sidewalk in front of the church and dropped into the massive sewer tunnel. The thing was huge, the kind of underground sewer you'd expect in New York City, not some rinky-dink ghost town in Montana. As we slushed through the sewage, our flashlights bobbing down the long tunnel, Clyde gave me a partial rundown. The client is called Crescent Ministries. They're like an offshoot of the Mormon Church, I guess. A lot of old people, Clyde said. Old rich people, Beard A said. We got to an intersection of tunnels and turned left. The sound of water pouring reverberated down the tunnel. Most of them live here in town. I know the buildings look abandoned, but most of them aren't. In fact, the only people that occupy this town are from Crescent Ministries. What about the weird stuff you all were mentioning? Well, over the years, Crescent Ministries has developed some interesting rituals, Clyde said. Rituals that cause immaculate plumbing problems, Beard A said, laughing. We turned a corner and I could see a light at the end of the tunnel, literally. It appeared to be the outlet point of the sewer. The sewage dumps into a huge basin down there, Clyde said, except, obviously, it's clogged right now. Hence us, I said. Indeed. As we got to within 100 feet of the outlet, the water had to be 3 feet deep. The closer we got to the clog, the deeper the water got. It smelled horrible, worse than just urine and feces. The water was thick and full of debris. Just follow our lead and try to keep it together, if you can, Clyde said. As we continued, the debris started taking similar shape. Bodily shapes. Holy hell, I muttered. The sewage was full of bodies dressed head to toe in white, bobbing in the water. Most of them were floating face up with their arms and legs tied together. Little water dinghies wrapped around their necks kept their heads afloat. Oh yeah, and their eyes were open. The other three continued, unfazed, down the tunnel. That's when something bit me. Damn! I screamed. I flashed my light down at the source of pain and saw a man dressed in all white, facing skyward with his hands tied in front of him. His eyeballs were bright against the dark backdrop, but were red and swollen. Get me the hell out of here, the man said in a raspy voice. Oh my god, I said, wading away from him. Guys, we've got a live one over here, I yelled. Please, the man whimpered. Okay, I'll help you. 1 minute, I said. Guys! They kept going, wading further and further away. I started sloshing through the water, now waist deep, moving in and out of dead bodies. As I continued, more voices rang out. Some of them hushed, some of them loud. Some were singing, some were babbling, some were pleading. How many of these bodies were alive? I've been in the sewer for like 3 days. Get me out, one said. There is sunshine in my soul today, a woman sang in a hushed voice. There is darkness before the light. There is darkness before the light. There is darkness before the light, another one muttered. I continued past all of them, trying to hold my breath. The closer I got to the end of the tunnel, the deader the bodies got. They were dressed in white as the others, but their faces were bloated and waterlogged. All of their eyes appeared to be open. As I inspected one of the bodies closer, I realized why. They were missing eyelids. My heart was pounding. Clyde, Beard B and Beard A were all at the end of the tunnel, hacking away at the clog. Clyde, Beard B, why is no one responding to me? I yelled. Clyde turned around and motioned for me to come over. We need your muscles, Scotty, he said. As I closed in on them, I saw they were hacking away at, of course, it was more dead bodies, piled 8 feet high. Welcome to Arch Falls, Beard A said, handing me a long machete-type thing. You guys, I started, before feeling a wave of nausea pass over me. Beard A and Beard B continued slashing at bodies clogging the tunnel with muted crunches. I can't do this, I said. Scotty, I know it's weird, but it's their religion, Clyde said over the sound of crunching dead bodies. There's live ones back there, I said. I don't know what to tell you, man. It's their belief. They see darkness before light, or something like that, he said. Their eyelids. Yeah, it's creepy as hell, believe me, Clyde said. Hell yeah, the clog is clear, Beard A yelled. The water started flowing again, carrying the bodies down the tunnel to the outlet point, where they perched 30 feet to the basin below. There is sunshine in my soul today, another woman sang just behind me. Her eyes were red and nearly swollen shut, but she was smiling. Jesus, I said, watching her bob up and down. We've got a singing sister, Clyde announced. I got it, Beard A said. Brighter than the sun, she sang as Beard A waded closer to her. My sister, are you ready for the sunshine? Beard A asked in a mock pastoral tone. My brother, I am ready for the sunshine. Show me the sunshine, she cried. Jesus Christ, I'm coming. Beard A welded his machete high above his head and slammed it down at her throat, instantly decapitating her. A combination of the rotting sewage water and blood splashed on our faces. God damn it, what the hell? I yelled. Beard B high-fived Beard A. That was clean as hell, bro. The woman's remains floated another 30 feet or so until it reached the end of the tunnel, then disappeared. The voices got louder and louder as the group of live bodies flowed towards us. Please, oh God, please get me out of this goddamn tunnel. This is not how Pastorati said it would be. He did not say we'd be trapped in a sewage tunnel for days like this, a floating man said frantically. Another floating woman spoke. Peter, enough, my brother. Our time is almost here. Hello, my brothers and sisters, Beard B said. Both Beard A and Beard B wielded their machetes and came down on their heads. The man, Peter, got a blade in the middle of his face. The woman got the top part of her skull torn off. I threw up in the water. Clyde patted me on the shoulders, blankly watching the water, making sure it was flowing correctly. It's a little shocking at first. I totally get it. The water slowed again. "Damn it," Clyde said. "We've got another clog." "No way," Bit B said. "I'm exhausted. Too much slaughtering for one day." "Scotty's fresh," Beard A said. "Plus, he's done jack all since we've been down here." He handed me a machete. "You've got this, bro." I gulped hard, wiping the vomit from my chin. I looked at Clyde, our fearless leader, for guidance. "Beard B and Beard A, you guys take 10. Scotty, head to the point of congestion there at the end of the tunnel and work it out," he said. "Work it out?" "You know what that means," he said. "And here, take this." He handed me the vape pen. My heart was pounding through my chest. I took a couple of deep drags until the drug made its way to my head. I felt light, careless. I nodded slowly and closed my eyes. I gripped the machete and began making the trip to the end of the tunnel, sloshing through the bobbing bodies. Voices called out, some yelling, some singing, some pleading. I ignored them the best I could. Near the end of the tunnel, where the clog was, the bodies were stacked 4 high. I closed my eyes and steadied my breath. There is sunshine in my soul today. "Start slashing away, Scotty," one of the beards yelled down the hall. I lifted the machete and came down heavy, blindly striking the bodies. I don't know how many live people I hit, but the screams were deafening. "Couple more," a beard said. So I did a couple more. Slash, crunch, thud. The pile eventually broke free and the water started flowing again, much stronger this time. I jumped to the side of the tunnel, allowing the bodies to float by and take their final plunge. "That was quick, Scotty. Way to go," Clyde yelled above the rushing water. I'll admit, I felt proud. Disturbed, yes. Sick, absolutely. But the other guys were impressed, and I was okay with that. I started walking against the current, which became increasingly difficult as the flow picked up. When I was about 15 feet away from the mouth of the tunnel, I felt another bite to my leg. "Jesus, are you kidding me?" I yelped. I turned around to watch the biter float past me. "Please, please," he pleaded as his body floated to the end of the tunnel and plunged over the edge. "God damn," I said, lifting my leg out of the water. A group of 3 bodies drifted sideways and caught a fast stream, ploughing into me and knocking me off my feet. I fell on my back with my head toward the end of the tunnel. I was heading full steam ahead for the plunge. "Help!" I yelled. The rushing water was so loud I couldn't hear if the guys responded. I tried swimming against the current, but there were so many bodies in my way. I couldn't get traction. "Come with us," an old woman said, her eyes wide and red. I tried putting my feet down to find my footing, but I couldn't. Pure horror filled my bones as I realized what was coming next. The light at the end of the tunnel got brighter and brighter. The echoes of the tunnel faded away, giving way to the above-ground world, and then, engulfed in the blinding light of the sun reflecting off the basin, I fell. I braced for an impact that never came. That's because I wasn't falling. I was flying 100 miles an hour towards the heavens. A chorus was singing, "There is a sunshine in my soul today, more glorious and bright." I looked around and saw old people dressed in white with their arms extended, not tied together like they were in the tunnel, and their eyelids appeared to be normal. They looked at each other lovingly. Someone grabbed my hand. It was the biter from the tunnel, only he wasn't aggravated anymore. He was happy, joyful. Someone grabbed my other hand, a similarly happy old woman I recognized from the tunnel. I tried to speak. I tried to ask what the hell was happening, but I couldn't. The flying people continued coming together, forming a giant circle. Oh, the sunshine, blessed sunshine. The biting man leaned over to me. "We're almost there," he said, smiling. I directed my gaze ahead to what seemed to be an all-encompassing source of light. "Home," someone said. I smiled. I was overcome with an intense feeling of peace. This was heaven. I was dead, and this was heaven. Just as we seemed to be slowing down, the feeling went away. The intense white light surrounding us clicked off, and the flying sensation stopped, leaving us floating in pitch black. The biter and the other woman holding my hands released them. It was silent for a moment. Then rumblings along the cult members started. "Where did it go?" someone said. "My God, why hast thou forsaken me?" someone else said. It got cold. It was suffocating. "Where did the light go?" someone said. People started talking loudly, then started yelling. Then, as the air around me thinned, the cold air piercing my lungs, the yells turned to screams. Gut-wrenching screams from all directions. This heavy, crushing blackness was killing us, squeezing our souls into oblivion. Heaven wasn't the endgame. This was the endgame, a horrible abyss of nothing. I gripped my chest, gasping for air. "Please," I muttered among the thousand screaming voices. I awoke, gasping for air. It was dark. For a moment, I thought I was still in the black abyss, but then I recognized the blue digital numbers of my alarm clock. I was home. Somehow, I was home. My head was throbbing, and I was pretty sure my arm was broken. It was. I stumbled to the bathroom for some pain meds and caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. Boy, did I look like I was just tumbled out of a sewer drain. I took the pills, grabbed an ice pack from the freezer, and returned to bed. There were so many questions swirling around my head. How did I get home? How did I survive this fall? What the hell was that dream about? How long have I been out? The mystery of it all, combined with a crazy dream/near-death experience, made me restless. My throbbing head and arm didn't help. Even though it was 3 a.m, I decided I had to do something about it. I picked up my phone and called Clyde. It rang 4 times and beeped. "You've reached Clyde with Kimball Private Municipal Services. Leave a message." I don't know what the hell happened or how the hell I got home, but I'm pretty sure my arm is busted and I'm gonna need to file workers' comp or something. I'd really appreciate it if you call me back, I said, taking a moment to breathe. Then I felt tears coming on. What the hell was that today, man? God, I'm traumatized for... My phone beeped. It was Clyde calling back. I switched the call over. Hello? There was silence on the other end. "Clyde, are you there?" I said. The faint sound of rushing water came through the other end. "Clyde?" The water was echoing as if coming from underground sewer tunnels. "Clyde, are you there? Can you hear me?" Above the rushing water, a chorus of voices started singing. I'm a groundskeeper for Witching Hour Park. Crazy things happen between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. At least, that's what I call it, because that's technically when my shift begins, according to my boss, Mr. Barnes. Its official name really doesn't matter. I usually come significantly earlier than that so that I can finish the work early and head out. When I first started this job, many months ago, I tried debating this point with Mr. Barnes. I told him it didn't really make sense for me to come in that late. Why not come in a few hours before? Mr. Barnes wasn't really flexible on the issue at all. really weird. But the guy I work with, Evan, he's pretty cool, said not to worry about it. I had the same problem with the old man. Keep in mind he's pushing 80. Don't question why he does things, just do them anyway. So don't mind him, come in whenever you want, as long as Mr. Barnes has left the grounds, you're good. Mr. Barnes would typically leave around 11:30, based on what Evan said, but I always chose to come in a bit later than that, a little after 1 usually. The job actually started out really easy, and I enjoyed it for the most part, except everything was really creepy at that time of night, and the park was way out in the middle of nowhere. Anything could be walking in the woods beyond. But even Evan knew how to make the job fun. He said this was his 3rd year on the job. During that time, he figured out how to make the most of it. Brought his radio, and it was usually pretty good at picking up nearby stations. He never failed to bring a pack of cigarettes and would offer me one without hesitation. Being out there, hearing the crickets, and looking at the nearly infinite expanse of the night, I found myself grateful for the glowing ends of our cigarettes. Any additional source of lights was appreciated. The time I really looked forward to happened right after our shift started. Like I said, Evan knew how to make the most out of this job, and he'd bring a huge bag of marshmallows. He'd already have the sticks gathered by the time I arrived, the fire lit. We'd sit by the huge creek, and I'd watch the moon reflect gently off the rippling water as Evan began to tell me one of his creepy park stories. They were fairly generic, but I often enjoyed them. "You're not listening," Evan said, and my attention snapped back to him. He flicked his cigarette ashes into the fire, which hungrily devoured it. Evan smiled. "I can't believe you're not paying attention to probably the most important story I can tell you. This isn't just for entertainment either, Miles. Might end up saving your life." Evan gave me a wicked grin. It looked playful at first, but as the fire crackled in his excited eyes, fear creeped along the edges of my mind. This was an important story. Even Mr. Barnes doesn't know about this. He thought the old man quit, but nah, something happened to Wayne. Dude was pretty chill for a vet. I mean, he claimed to be a vet, but he was honestly pretty vague about the war stories. I'd ask him, he'd deflect, you know. Maybe he preferred to keep it private. "So, what happened to him?" I asked. Evan smiled again. "Don't make me rush this," he said. "You know I don't like to rush my stories. I like to get them just right." Evan was correct about that. We'd often waste an hour or more getting through one of Evan's stories. That's what I liked about them. They were long and detailed, and I'd often forget the creepy darkness waiting just beyond the fire. The radio briefly became consumed with static, and Evan turned it down. He didn't like to be distracted while telling his stories, said it made him forget his place. Okay, so where was I? Evan's expression went blank. Then the fire crackled and popped, and the vacant expression in his eyes, seeming to stir his thoughts. Right, so the thing that always ticked me off about Mr. Barnes is he would constantly hire people only in his peer group. I mean, I don't have a problem with that. It's just Mr. Barnes would only give them the green light. For a long time, I couldn't figure out why he hired me. Maybe someone had to take orders from the elders Mr. Barnes kept hiring. Evan had a sort of bitter expression on his face, and I couldn't help but be slightly amused. It also made me wonder why Mr. Barnes hired me too. I thought about the amount of work we had to do each night. Wasn't really a ton of work. Certainly not enough for the two of us. I didn't mind. Gave us a generous amount of slacking off time. Sorry for that little detour, man. It's just that Mr. Barnes really ticks me off sometimes. Anyway, so this Wayne guy starts. First day, tries to boss me around, which wasn't the worst part. He was pretty weird too, talking about how he didn't want to work at night, that he was too old for this. Complained about nearly everything. Still managed to boss me around between complaints about this or that. Evan stopped talking for a minute. There had been a flopping sound in the water. The sound was noticeable enough that it didn't seem likely that the source was a fish, but not large enough to prompt both of us to get up and move away from the fire. it would take a lot for that to happen in the middle of one of Evan's stories. I always got the distinct impression that even he creeped himself out with telling them. Evan lit another cigarette, took a puff and exhaled the smoke slowly, as if he was trying to soothe himself. But it was the other stuff that Wayne talked about how we were working during the witching hour. Spirits might get us if we wandered too close to the creek, or demons, or whatever. Evan rolled his eyes. They became fearful again, as if suddenly remembering something. Wayne was really getting on my nerves at that point, so I told him to go clear the sticks on the long hill leading from the park house over there. I'm not sure why he listened, since it seemed clear he thought of himself as the boss. He kind of mumbled, like he was confused or something. Anyway, I started clearing out the trash cans near the bathrooms. Occupy myself, because I'm a good worker. Don't like to slack off. Evan grinned at me, but it seemed a little disturbing due to the direction of the story and because of the atmosphere of the park that night. I had just got done unloading the trash when I heard this choked scream. I ran down to the creek just in time to see Wayne's hand poking up from the water. Evan said, voice rising, eyes filled with crackling fear. This had really happened, I thought. Wayne, I thought I wouldn't see his hand again. Actually, it didn't emerge from the water for several minutes, and just as I was about to turn away, the hand came up, shaking. So I grabbed his hand, almost fell in myself. Wayne's hand kept fumbling, grabbing tightly and yanking, like he was trying to pull me in. The radio gave a weird belch of static, and Evan quickly turned it down. Strangely, I thought I could hear odd guttural voices coming from the radio. I couldn't be sure though. So, Wayne died? I asked, almost breathless, feeling like how I imagined Wayne felt as he was drowning. No oxygen. Yeah, he died, but he also tried to pull me in. He wasn't desperate to be saved. He wanted to pull me in, man. Sometimes I still wonder if that was his hand or the thing which pulled him under. And I don't know what creeps me out more, thinking about Wayne's body at the bottom of the creek or the thing responsible for it. Evan stood up then, brushing off his work pants, just baggy black jeans basically. He tossed the remainder of the cigarette into the fire and lit another one. He said he didn't want to be by the creek anymore, that he didn't like telling the story. In fact, I had been the first person he told the story to. I heard a flopping sound coming from maybe a couple dozen feet from where Evan was standing. After that, I didn't argue with him about going up to the park house to do some maintenance. Getting away from that water seemed like the smart idea, but it confused me that after that experience, Evan would choose to come down here every night and start a fire. Evan was sweeping sticks off the cement floor of the park house, but stopping every few minutes to check his phone. I had to suppress some laughter when I thought about how he said he didn't like to slack off. Looking around, I was grateful for the 2 large flashlights, one placed on each of the outer tables, but facing in. This seemed to give us the most amount of light. I had so many questions for Evan, I thought, as I pulled out the second large trash bag from its can. My nose wrinkled at the prospect of having to remove the garbage from the bathrooms. But why would Evan choose to be down by the creek after such a harrowing experience? Then I wondered about all the other workers who Mr. Barnes hired. Evan said consistently hired, so there had been quite a few elderly folk out here in the park at night. Was Wayne the only one to be pulled into the creek? Did the others just walk off the job? All of them? I found that to be unlikely. My thoughts returned to Evan, about how maybe he wanted to sit near the creek out of guilt. Because he didn't get to Wayne in time, he felt responsible for his death. Except there was no evidence of guilt on Evan's face as he told the story, even at the end. So there had to be a different reason. When I turned around, I had planned on asking his willingness to sit by the creek despite his horrible experience near it, but Evan wasn't anywhere near the park house. I called his name once, and the second time it came out more meekly. I was afraid then. Shortly after telling the story, Evan just disappeared. I went to the edge of the park house, shoes still on the cement. For some odd reason, I thought that would somehow protect me from the dangers lurking beyond. Then my thoughts became frantic. What if the creature Evan talked about in his story snatched him when I wasn't looking? And if it had done so, that meant it could sneak up on me at any time without me being aware. Suddenly, I didn't feel safe at all. Maybe it wasn't a bad idea to put some distance between myself and the area where I had last glimpsed Evan. I took one of the flashlights and shook it, checking to make sure the lights wouldn't flicker. I walked to the edge of the hill, shining the flashlight down toward the creek. Nothing but the sound of crickets and the creeping of the mist along the surface of the water. I shivered. What the hell took you and Wayne? I said to myself. I contemplated just getting in my car and leaving. It sat as a hulking piece of red metal in a small gravel parking lot far away from the park house. Too far away. I turned my flashlight toward the creek again, and this time I saw a vague shape just standing there. As much as I wanted to run down the hill since I thought it might be Evan, I couldn't because it had started to rain. Nothing too heavy, but despite that, I didn't want to chance hurrying down the hill and slipping and tumbling all the way down. I slowly made my way down the hill. The vague shape didn't seem to be moving at all, or at least not with any consistent forward motion. It would sort of lurch forward, and I thought a few times it would fall into the creek, but it would always snap back. I called out Evan's name a few times. No response from it, but intuitively I knew it was Evan. Toward the end, I was so anxious to confirm this that I slid and fell a few feet to the bottom. It took several moments, but I finally got back on my feet and practically ran to the shape. It was indeed Evan. I couldn't concentrate on his swaying because the radio he had placed near the fire on an old tree stump emitted harsh, staticky sounds, and the guttural voices occurred at a much more rapid pace. I swore I heard what sounded like gurgling. It was harsh on my ears, also making me a little frightened. I quickly switched the radio off, then ran back to Evan. I had to shake him several times before he apparently snapped out of it. He couldn't remember walking down to the creek, and he was in such a daze I didn't even bother asking the question which was on my mind. There was a splashing sound some inches from the creek's edge. Small and harmless enough at first, but it made me jump. Evan became more clear-eyed when both of us glimpsed. I'm not quite sure what we saw. It seemed like a hand at first, distinctly human, but another glance revealed it to be too bony and arched. I swear I thought I saw claws, reflecting the thin sliver of moonlight which managed to poke through the clouds. Evan and I both ran to the park house, an exchange of words not even necessary. The rest of the night passed without incident. I'm not sure why we stayed, except travelling up the hill leading out of the park to the gravel parking lot seemed like a fool's errand. Evan seemed wide-eyed, with brief periods of lucidity. I had to keep shaking him back to reality. At about 4 a.m, Evan stabilised almost completely. In his clear-headed state, he suggested we remain under the roof of the park house until the sun was completely visible in the sky. I did agree, and, like I said, walking to our cars seemed ill-advised. Evan and I rarely talk about that night, but when we do, it's never near the creek. She called it yoga for one. I found a stream a month ago, during a rare confluence of self-disdain and spare time that collided into something resembling motivation. Tucked between the kickboxing classes and the home gym meatheads was her thumbnail. It caught my eye. it was a simple shot of her face, so near to the camera that I could count the freckles. Her teeth a little too large for her mouth, and her nose ever so slightly crooked. I've never been the type of guy to consider yoga, but I tuned in, and in a matter of seconds, I was entranced. The girl was in a living room, a haphazard mise-en-scène, the floor speckled with sad little plants and stacked magazines. She posed with her hands on the floor and her hips thrust in the air, her butt perched in the center of the screen. I decided to stay a while. I had no yoga mat, so I laid out a towel. It was difficult to follow along. She talked a lot, and only a fraction of it was about the routine. Press your heels together and bend your head to your feet, breathing deeply. My feet smell like peaches and cream today. Makes me want to gobble them up. I love summer peaches. I love biting into them and feeling the juice erupt in my mouth. It reminds me of the time when... And I fell into the meditative quagmire woven by her words, inhaling the scent of my own socks, failing to notice she'd moved into a different pose. After a while, my muscles trembled with the effort of supporting my soft body in these unfamiliar positions, so I called it a day. It was then that I noticed it. Viewers 1. That was me. I was the only one watching. I felt an inexplicable flood of guilt when I closed the browser, like I was abandoning her. I checked back into her channel the next few afternoons. It was the strangest thing. She was always streaming. She was either unaware of my presence or apathetic to it. Her ramblings, so freewheeling that they approached random word association, didn't seem to change whether I was there or not. She was often mid-sentence when I logged in. She was flirty in a way that made it clear she wasn't trying to be, charmingly raw in a tendency to fumble instructions. Curiosity overwhelmed me. I yearned to discover more about this fascinating creature. Her movements drew me in like she was grasping me through the screen. I marveled at the feeling of being her silent voyeur. I developed more comfort with the basic poses, though I still couldn't get my hands anywhere near my toes. Too soon, she notched up the level of difficulty. She eased herself into the splits, each leg outstretched, her toes pointed at perfect right angles. I tried my best to replicate the pose, my groin protesting the pressure. Each day, she pushed a little farther. She curved her spine sharply behind her, a graceful arc. She lifted her back leg high into the air at an angle that seemed to wrench her hip out of place. I forced my body into the closest approximations of her geometry that my tendons would allow. My teeth gritted against the sharp warnings issued by my nerves. At night, I dreamed that she was breaking my joints, cracking my limbs into the clean shapes that she maintained so effortlessly. One day, she twisted her arms so far behind her that I felt sympathetic pain, and folded herself up so that her bent legs swooped around her shoulders, touching her toes behind her neck. She smiled at the camera, demurely, politely. "You want to see me bend into a pretzel, don't you?" she asked. That was the first time she addressed me. I would forget to eat. I'd wake up on the couch, having dozed off, and she would be murmuring about pomegranates while her forehead brushed her knees. Did she sleep? Did she eat? I saw no evidence of it. Every time I moved, my body ached with the memory of being stretched to its limits. I was spending 10, 12, 14 hours a day on a stream. She spoke to me frequently. "I know you've been watching me. I think you like watching me. How far do you want me to twist for you?" The fluid shifting of her body into vertices and curves and delicate polygons was hypnotizing. I was getting lost in the light of a flickering flame as it swirled into different patterns. I was working myself into something more pliable, molding myself into something like her image. It's difficult to pinpoint the moment she went too far. It was more like the creep of quicksand than any one single moment. She would lie on her back and lift herself on the palms and soles of her feet, her torso thrusting at the ceiling like she was something from The Exorcist. She would inch her hands and feet closer together, folding her body backwards on itself until she was nearly split in half, and then she would skitter forward until the whites of her eyes flooded the screen, scaring me so much that I jumped. And she would laugh as if she had made a joke. She would twist her head around like an owl and thrust it between her thighs, always blinking at the screen, always smiling like we were sharing some inside secret, like I was in on the sly conspiracy. She said, "You like this, don't you, Mr. Smith? Am I your foldable pocket toy?" Smith is a very common last name. There was a non-zero chance she just guessed correctly. But this freaked me out enough to slam the laptop shut, shattering the image of a toothy smile. I had to resume normal life, but I had almost nothing to fill my time except television and social media and filling out applications for jobs I'd never want to work. A strange sensation tickled at me, like something was wrong, like I was forgetting something, and powerful waves of guilt, the same guilt I'd felt when I closed the stream the first day I'd found her. I tried not to. I really tried to stay away, but the urge overwhelmed me, so I returned. For the first time, she wasn't on screen when I logged in. I peered closer at the scene, seeing the familiar yoga mat on the ground, the coffee table, the magazines. There was a soft noise coming from just off screen, a muffled noise, irregular and halting, a human voice. I turned the volume all the way up, and I couldn't tell if it was laughter or crying. Feeling sick, I closed the stream. This brings us to yesterday. I had spent countless hours thinking about her, wondering what she was doing, whether she was still telling stories to an invisible visitor. I logged in. Her eyes filled the webcam's field of vision so suddenly that I scrambled backwards, and that sound, echoing from the walls of her apartment and mine, and it was now clear that it was the sound of misery. Her moan was wordless, and as her face backed away, I saw why. Her bare foot was stuffed halfway in her mouth, her jaw nearly unhinged to accommodate it, the ball wedged between her teeth. Tears were streaming down her face, pooling around the corners of her stretched lips. Her arms were folded behind her head, and her other leg was tucked under the first. She was struggling, and I realized that she was stuck. She was trapped in that position, a twisted ball of limbs and strained joints, unable to speak. I stared, slack-jawed at the screen, and her eyes met mine, seeming to blink in recognition. The force of her sobs crescendoed. In relief? I wasn't sure. I had no idea what to do. I didn't know her name or where she lived. I didn't know for sure that she was in the same country. I sat, frozen, for long moments, watching the twitching of her limbs as she tried to wrench herself out of the cage her body made. Then it struck me. I could type. "Can you type your address?" The message pinged its arrival at her computer. Our first real communication. She shook her head almost imperceptibly, with a slight range of motion her position allowed. I tried again. "Can you type with your nose?" Her eyes flickered across the page as she read my words. With great effort, she rocked herself over, landing face first on the keyboard. All that was sent was a mess of keystrokes. My heart pounding, I said, "Try again." I watched as she managed to prop herself precariously on one shoulder. Her body was convulsing with the force of her sobs. Eventually, she leaned forward, carefully, delicately, and pressed the tip of her nose to the keys. 3. "Yes, that was it. That's great. Give me another number." We traded for long, suspenseful minutes, her giving me one number or letter at a time. me writing them down and encouraging her as best I could. "You're doing great. I'm here with you. Help is on the way." She had cobbled together a number in a street. It had taken us nearly an hour to get to this point. She had just finished typing apartment 12 when she stopped, trembling with the effort of keeping herself upright, and we met eyes again through the camera, hers shining with pain and fear. And then she collapsed. She rolled out of sight. Panicking, I sent her dozens of frantic messages. "What city? What state? Stay with me. I'm here. Where are you? I need more." It became clear no one was coming. Her sobs stilled, her breath quieted. I searched the address and found every city in the country where the address she had given me existed. I called every police station in every jurisdiction within range. It took a lot of explanation, but after hours of work, there was nothing I could do but sit and wait nervously by the phone and stare at the empty apartment framed within my laptop screen. All I could do was type. "I'm here with you. You'll be safe. This will be over soon. You're not alone." The ringing of the phone nearly sent me out of my skin. It was 1 a.m. "Did you find her?" I asked desperately, scanning the scene for any sign of activity. "Tell me she's alright." The voice on the other end of the line sighed, a deep sigh. Of sadness or frustration, I couldn't say. "We found her," he said, his words gentle but guarded. "Stuck in that position, as you described. She's not okay. She died of dehydration." "She... what? No, that's not possible. I just spoke to her." "I don't know what you saw, son. I truly don't. But the girl we found has been dead for months."